I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. This party is for important people, Barbara. You don't need to come. The words hit me like a slap across my weathered face. I stood frozen in the middle of a backyard I knew intimately, the backyard of the house I had paid 80% down on, holding a small gift bag. My daughter-in-law, Lauren Jones, said it straight to my face, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing dismissively while her relatives chuckled behind her. I was 72 years old, and to them I wasn't even worth acknowledging at my own son's housewarming party. The sun was setting over the large oak tree I had planted myself 3 years before selling my old house to help Kevin and Lauren buy this one. Now its branches cast long shadows across the unfamiliar faces of guests who clinked champagne glasses on the deck, while I stood below like a housekeeper who had wandered in by mistake. Party for important people. The words echoed in my head as I clutched my small gift bag. A set of hand-embroidered kitchen towels I'd spent weeks making. I had pictured this housewarming so many times. Arriving early to help Lauren set the tables, bringing Kevin's favorite salad that he'd loved since childhood. Taking a family photo under that oak tree I'd planted with my own hands. But nothing I imagined had materialized. I wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't important. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something that made my breath catch. A gleaming new SUV in the open garage, still with temporary tags. Last month, when Kevin called asking for help with their electric bill, he'd mentioned they couldn't afford car repairs. Yet here sat what looked like a $60,000 vehicle, its metallic paint still showroom perfect. I nodded slightly at one of Lauren's cousins, a man who laughed with a drink in his hand. He didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Something had clicked inside me, a small but definitive snap like a twig breaking underfoot. This wasn't the first slight. This wasn't the first lie. But somehow, standing there alone while laughter floated down from the deck, I knew it would be the last time I accepted either. I walked to my 10-year-old Camry, buckled my seatbelt, and sat motionless for several minutes. Strange. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I'd been waiting for this moment for years, not to be humiliated, but to finally see everything with painful clarity. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't turn on the radio. The sound of the engine and tires on pavement was enough, steady and clear, reminding me I still controlled something in this world. When I got home, I dropped my purse on the chair and didn't bother turning on the lights. The house sat in the soft orange glow of a setting Sunday, shadows growing in corners where I used to display family photos that I'd since put away. I sank into the armchair where I usually embroider or read the morning paper and stared out the window. I didn't cry, not a single tear. I think I'd already cried myself dry over the past few years. Like when Lauren said I called too much and it wore her out. When Kevin started responding to my texts with emojis instead of words. When I sent $3,000 to fix their car and received nothing but a transfer notification. As twilight deepened, I rose slowly and walked to the old file cabinet in my home office. That dark brown wooden cabinet had been with me through my entire accounting career, holding everything from utility bills to handwritten letters from the 80s to receipts I'd saved out of professional habit. I pulled out a folder labeled Family, Kevin and Lauren. I'd even used a pink sticky tab to make it easy to find. My fingers were methodical, careful, as if I were preparing a financial report for a client I had once loved. I flipped through each page, letting the numbers tell their story. Home repair bill, $2,800. Spanish classes for my granddaughter Lily, $1,200. A sofa set for Kevin's old apartment, $1,700. A bank loan I co-signed, $15,000. And those were only the ones I still had on paper. The quick transfers when they needed to get through the month, the cash I'd handed over so Kevin wouldn't feel awkward, the birthday gifts for Lauren that I bought so my son wouldn't appear thoughtless. Those weren't recorded in any ledger. They lived only in my memory and my slowly eroding pride. I closed the folder, my accountant's mind already calculating. Something clicked inside me. Not anger, but clarity. I took out a blank notebook, the kind with grid paper that I'd used throughout my career for precise figures. With my favorite blue pen, I began writing methodically. January 2019, car transmission repair, $2,200 requested by Kevin. Reason, can't get to work without it. My reaction, went to bank immediately, line by line, date by date, request by request. Each entry I wrote felt like a pin popping a balloon, the balloon of my illusion that I was the perfect mother, the devoted grandmother, the sweet mother-in-law who would do anything for family. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would be the same again. That night I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the front porch. The autumn breeze was gentle. Yellow leaves rode each gust, needing no permission, no invitation to travel where the wind took them. I thought about Robert, my husband. If he were alive, he'd be furious at how they'd treated me. But he'd also smile and say, "Barbara, it's time you lived for you." I took a sip of tea. The faint bitterness touched my tongue, but I didn't feel bitter anymore. I felt clear-minded. That night I didn't check Facebook to see who had posted photos from the housewarming. I didn't turn on the TV to drown out my thoughts. I just lay in bed, eyes open to the ceiling, and asked myself a question that had been building for years. If I stop paying, will I still be called Mom? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I was about to find out. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. Autumn sunlight slipped through my curtains, laying a pale gold path across a room so quiet I could hear the ticking of my bedside clock. I lay still for a moment, feeling like my body had been through a storm while my mind remained strangely calm. I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of strong black coffee. The rich aroma filled the house, taking me back to younger days when I'd gulp a sip and rush to my accounting office. Back then, I was known for my attention to detail, my ability to find discrepancies in the most complex financial statements. My colleagues joked that I could spot a misplaced decimal point from across the room. Those skills had served me well in my career, but I had never applied them to my own family situation. Until now, I set my coffee on the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The screen lit up to a string of bank emails I usually ignored. I clicked Saved Accounts and started downloading statements. The lines appeared cold and exact on the screen. February 2019, sent to Kevin, $1,200, car deposit. May 2019, sent to Lauren, $3,000, salon equipment. November 2019, sent to Kevin, $850, Lily's winter tuition. The granddaughter I've rarely been allowed to hold because Lauren doesn't like the smell of medication on old people. I've never taken more than basic blood pressure pills, but somehow the excuse stuck. Each amount brought back a specific memory. I remembered the night Kevin called, voice tight with worry. "Mom, my car's completely dead. I need a replacement now. I can't get to work without a car." I went straight to the bank without thinking. The word need always moved me to action. Or when Lauren sat across from me at a cafe, eyes glossy with what I now recognize were calculated tears. "Mom, if I don't get more capital, the salon will close. All my dreams, everything I've worked for." I emptied my emergency fund and handed it over. I believed I was saving a whole family's future. I scrolled through the statements, watching the evidence pile up. The numbers kept coming, steady and cold. I grabbed my grid notebook again and continued logging. This month, $2,000 next month, 1,500 another urgent need, 4,000. As my pen moved across the page, I noticed my hand tremble slightly, not from age, but from a quiet anger I had never allowed myself to feel. For years, I'd turned myself into an ATM with a heart, a financial institution that never closed and never asked questions. I paused, took a long breath, then totaled it all. 47,600. I stared at the number, reading it over and over like a sentence handed down over my head. $47,600. That's what I'd given in just 5 years, not counting cash and birthday cards, gifts, or the times I paid their utility bills directly. Almost $50,000 from my retirement savings that I would never get back. I stood up and paced my living room, my eyes landing on an old photograph on the wall, Kevin's high school graduation. Robert and I stood on either side of him, our son in the middle in his blue gown, diploma in hand. His smile was bright and genuine. I remember Robert whispering in my ear, "See, every hardship was worth it." If Robert were alive, what would he think seeing our only son treat me like an outsider? I returned to the table and looked at my notebook. The numbers sat there in straight lines, like a row of witnesses that couldn't be cross-examined or dismissed. For the first time, I wasn't seeing them through a mother's eyes, but through an accountant's, clear, transparent, and absurd. My phone buzzed. I flinched. Lauren's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. A text followed immediately after. "Mom, just checking on your health. Call me when you're free." I laughed out loud, the sound strange in my empty house. In all these years, Lauren had never called just to check on my health. There was always a reason beneath the surface: rent, credit cards, tuition, new equipment. Checking on your health was just a thin curtain drawn over a bottomless financial hole. I didn't call back. I closed my laptop, folded my notebook, and put it in the drawer. But in my head, that number kept echoing. 47,600. That afternoon, I went to the nearby grocery store. I carried a small basket and picked up a few essentials: milk, eggs, bread, some fresh greens. The total came to just under $30. I paid, tucked the receipt into my wallet, and suddenly found it darkly funny. I'm the kind of person who keeps a receipt for eggs, yet I'd let tens of thousands slip away without ever asking for a thank you. Back home, I put the groceries away and sat in my armchair. For the first time in years, I didn't feel hurt. I felt angry. Angry at my own leniency. Angry that I'd let motherly love be twisted into a one-way financial contract. I opened my phone and scrolled through old messages. From Kevin: "Mom, we're in a bind. Can you loan me some money?" From Lauren: "Mom, rent is late this week. Can you help?" Every message followed the same pattern: short, direct, with no small talk, no "how are you doing?" no real interest in my life. Reading them now, I felt like a customer service representative they called only when they needed their issues fixed. That night, I opened the notebook again and wrote one last line at the bottom. "I'm not a mother anymore. I'm the family bank, and starting today, this bank is closed." When I shut the notebook, I felt a new current move through my chest. Lighter but colder. I knew the next step wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I'd crossed the hardest threshold: facing the truth. I turned off the living room lights and headed to my bedroom. In the dark, I heard the wind whistle past my window. I pulled up the covers and closed my eyes. No longer a mother waiting for a thank you text, but a soldier ready for a new battle. The next morning, I walked into First National Bank at precisely 9:15 a.m. The lobby was wide and bright, sunlight pouring through large windows onto glossy tile floors. I'd sat in those plush chairs dozens of times before, but this time, everything felt different. No more rushing to transfer money to Kevin. No more scanning my balance to see what I could squeeze out for them. Today, I came to end it all. Richard Miller, my longtime account manager, smiled when he saw me. He was in his mid-50s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he greeted clients. He knew me well enough that I didn't need an appointment. "Good morning, Mrs. Jones," he said in that warm baritone. "How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath and placed my thick notebook on his desk. "Richard, I want to cancel all automatic transfers to Kevin and Lauren Jones, and I want to set up a new account, separate, that no one knows about but me." He looked up, studying my face. His eyes brightened with surprise, but not shock, as if he had been expecting this day to come. "Are you sure? For 5 straight years, those transfers have been like clockwork. You've never missed one." I gave him a small, wry smile. "That's exactly why I'm here today." Richard typed quickly, the computer screen glowing against his face. He printed out a thick stack of papers and slid them over to me. "These are the statements for the past 5 years. Do you want to look them over one last time?" I opened the folder. The numbers lined up cold and impersonal. Each amount I'd given stared back like an indictment. $10,200, $3,000, $850, $4,000. An endless list. I ran my hand over the page, not to reread, but to feel it. This was the evidence, the answer to every sleepless night I'd spent asking where I went wrong. I wasn't wrong to love, but I was wrong to turn love into an endless financial obligation. "Richard," I said softly, "do you remember when I rushed in to withdraw $5,000 for Kevin? You asked if I was sure, and I laughed and said it was for family." He nodded. "I remember. I worried about you then, but you seemed determined." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Today I'm more determined, but this time it's for me." I signed the cancellation form. My hand was steady, not shaking. Richard collected the papers and carefully slid them into a plastic folder. "All set, Mrs. Jones. From now on, no one can touch your accounts unless you specifically authorize it. I've also opened a new savings account for you, and only you have the password. I strongly recommend you don't share it with anyone, including family." I smiled. "Don't worry. I've learned a very expensive lesson." When I stepped out of the bank, the morning sun hit the pavement head-on. I felt like I had just put down a burden so heavy that my shoulders suddenly felt weightless. All these years, every visit here meant watching my balance drain away. Today, I walked out believing my money truly belonged to me. That afternoon, my phone rang non-stop. First, it was Kevin. I let it ring. Then Lauren called. I stayed silent. After that, a stream of texts popped up. "Mom, I don't see the transfer. Did you forget?" "Mom, we need money for the credit card bill this week. Text me back." "Mom, please don't do this to us. You know we rely on you." I read each message but didn't answer. For the first time, I let the phone fall quiet on the kitchen table. No explanations, no excuses, no promises. Just silence. That evening, I took out the bank statements and read them again, like a little farewell ritual. I drew a red line through each item and whispered, "Enough, no more." It felt like unhooking one chain after another that had bound me for years. I remembered the time I paid for a new air conditioner for their apartment. Lauren had said, "You're so kind, Barbara. Without you, we wouldn't know what to do." Those sweet words once made me feel proud, but now I could see they were just a way to tie me to an endless cycle of giving. Every time they praised my generosity, they were really setting the stage for the next request, and I foolishly mistook that manipulation for love. That night I sat by the living room window watching the streetlights spill yellow pools onto the sidewalk. I wrote one last line in my notebook. "The Bank of Barbara Jones is officially closed, permanently." I closed the notebook and set it on the coffee table. This time I wasn't writing just for myself, but for the future. If I ever felt weak, I would open it and read those cold numbers to remember how many years, how much money, and how much trust I had poured into one-sided love. When the clock struck 10, I turned off every light. The house fell into darkness, but inside me there was no emptiness anymore, only resolve. I didn't know how Kevin and Lauren would react tomorrow when they realized the money would no longer flow into their pockets. But I knew one thing for certain. I was ready for the fight. And this time, I wouldn't back down. The next morning, I had just poured my first cup of coffee when the phone rang. Lauren's name lit up the screen. I stared at it, my hand steady around my mug. The ringing dragged on like someone pounding on the door of my peaceful home. Finally, I answered. Lauren's voice came through, tearful and frantic. "Mom, the credit card got declined. The mortgage payment is due. We thought you forgot the transfer." I took a sip of coffee, let the warmth spread across the roof of my mouth, and answered calmly. "I didn't forget, Lauren. I'm choosing not to send it anymore." There were a few seconds of silence. Then she burst out. "You can't do that. We rely on you. You know that." I ended the call without another word. My hand still rested lightly on the mug. My heartbeat remained strangely calm. Not even 10 minutes later, Kevin called. His voice wasn't soft like Lauren's. It was blunt and harsh. "Mom, what's going on? I just checked the account. No money came in. You know we have a loan payment due this week, right?" I closed my eyes and pictured his little face from years ago, when he would throw his arms around my neck after being picked on at school. Now that accusing tone had no warmth at all. "I know," I said simply, "and I've decided to stop." "What's wrong with you?" he shouted. "Who's gotten in your head? Don't let people feed you weird ideas." I stayed quiet for a few seconds, then hung up. The phone kept buzzing after that, but I ignored it. In the afternoon, I opened the windows to let the cool air in. I heard footsteps on the porch, then an urgent knock. I looked out to see Lauren standing there, hair disheveled, eyes red. When I opened the door, she rushed forward and clutched my arm. "Mom, please don't do this. If we lose the house, Lily will have to switch schools. She's still little. She needs stability. You're her grandmother. Don't you think about her?" I looked her straight in the eyes. For a brief moment, my heart pinched at my granddaughter's name. But then I remembered that for years I hadn't been allowed to hold her even once. Lauren always had an excuse. She's sleeping, she's studying, she's worried about germs. I gently pulled my arm free and spoke low but firm. "Lauren, I've thought about Lily more than anyone, but what you just said isn't about her. It's about the money you want me to keep paying." Lauren's face shifted, anger flashing in her eyes. The tears dried up instantly. She spun around and stormed toward her car, tossing back over her shoulder. "You'll regret this." I stood in the doorway, watching her car leave my driveway in a rush. I didn't feel shaky or uncertain. Instead, I felt a new sensation: self-possession. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Today, for the first time in years, I wasn't bullied by tears or scolding. I stood my ground." I closed the notebook and smiled to myself. The real test had only just begun. The next day, Kevin showed up. He didn't knock. He just stood blocking the walkway, jaw tight, hands in his pockets. "Mom, we need to talk." I opened the door but didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway, between two worlds. The home I was protecting inside and outside. The son who treated me like a wallet. He glared at me. "We can't live without your support." "I'm working hard." "Lauren is too. You know how expensive everything is now." I cut in, my voice gentle but firm. "You're 35 years old, Kevin. At your age, your father supported a whole family and bought our first house without help. You're still leaning on your elderly mother." He frowned, his voice stiffening. "You make it sound like we've never cared about you." You think all we care about is money? I answered softly, each word heavy as stone. Tell me, when was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? Kevin went silent, his lips pressed tight, eyes looking away. I knew he had no answer. Finally, he left without a goodbye, stomping down the walkway to his car. I closed the door. The bitterness was there, but I didn't collapse from it. I understood that with every refusal, I was pulling myself a little further out of their manipulative grip. For the next 3 days, my phone almost never stopped ringing. When I didn't pick up, they left voicemail messages, one after another. It was always the same themes: rent, credit card debt, bank loans. I listened to them but didn't reply. Instead, I took a walk around my neighborhood. I stopped by the local bakery and bought a warm loaf of sourdough bread as a small treat for myself. The clerk greeted me with a friendly smile and asked which jam I preferred. I felt a sudden pang. How long had it been since I had a simple conversation that wasn't about money? I brought the bread home, ate it alone at my kitchen table, savoring each bite and thinking, maybe this is what freedom tastes like. That night, a long text came in from Lauren. Mom, I'm sorry if I said anything that upset you, but we're really in a tough spot. If you don't help, we'll lose everything. I know you don't want your granddaughter to suffer. I read it over and over. The wording sounded gentle, but I recognized the familiar scent of manipulation. They weren't asking out of love. They were demanding out of fear of losing their only reliable source of money. I set the phone down without replying. I told myself, in the past, a message like this would have sent me running to the bank. Now I just feel relieved that I've learned to stand firm. On Sunday morning, I got up early and went to church, something I'd done regularly for years. But my mind had always been tangled with worries about Kevin and Lauren's financial issues. Today, I sat still and listened to Pastor Williams speak about boundaries. Boundaries aren't selfish, he said. They're necessary. Even Jesus withdrew from crowds to pray alone. Setting limits isn't about rejecting others. It's about honoring what God has entrusted to you. I sat there with tears streaming down my face, unable to stop them. Not tears for Kevin or Lauren, but for myself, the woman who had let motherhood become chains for so many years. That afternoon, Lauren called again. Her voice wasn't soft this time. It was sharp, with an edge that cut through the phone line. If you don't send money, we'll have to take action. Don't blame us for what happens next. I pressed the end button. My heart didn't flutter like before. I knew things would get uglier, but I also knew I was ready. I'd thought after Lauren's vague threats that they might quiet down and find another solution. They didn't. Just 2 days later, when I came back from the grocery store, Kevin's gray pickup truck was parked right out front. Lauren stood beside it, arms crossed, eyes like steel. I stopped and left my grocery bags in the car. I wasn't going to start this confrontation before I'd even stepped inside my house. Kevin stepped forward, voice tight. Mom, we need a serious talk. I looked at him without a word. Lauren cut in. You're hurting this family if you don't keep helping. Lily will suffer. Do you want your granddaughter growing up in hardship? I drew a long breath. Lily again, the familiar shield they used to stab my conscience. If you truly care about Lily, I said quietly, learn to support your own family. A grandmother can't raise a child for its parents. Kevin's face twisted. He moved closer, voice low but boiling. You're selfish. Your whole life you preached sacrifice for family, and now you're turning your back. I looked him in the eye. No, Kevin, I did sacrifice for years. You never valued it. From now on, I simply won't sacrifice anymore. Lauren shot him a glance, then switched to a syrupy tone that sounded painfully fake. Mom, maybe someone's been influencing you, or you're confused. Think again. We just want you to be happy. I let out a rough laugh that sounded strange even to my own ears. Happy? For years you've taken every dollar, every hour of sleep, every small joy I had. If that's love, then my happiness is dirt cheap. Lauren's face went pale. The sugary facade crumbled. She hissed, "Fine. If this is your choice, you'll face the consequences." Kevin tugged her toward the truck. Before getting in, he turned and gave me a look that wasn't a son's, but a stranger's. "You'll regret this?" The truck pulled away, leaving a gray stripe of dust on the road. I stood still, fists clenched at my sides. I knew those weren't just angry words. They were a warning. That afternoon, I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Today their true faces showed. No more circling. No more masks. They've made me the enemy." When I finished and closed the notebook, my heart was heavy. I had prepared myself for anger and blame, but I had never imagined my own son could look at me with such a cold gaze. The next day, I stopped by the church. After the service, Pastor Williams walked over and asked, "Barbara, are you all right? You looked deep in thought during the sermon." I hesitated for a moment, then gave him a brief summary of the situation. He nodded, sadness in his eyes. "Family, when blinded by money, can be crueler than strangers," he said gently. "But don't leave yourself alone in this. Seek support and protection." Those words echoed in my head as I drove home. I knew the gentle phase was over. Now I had to be ready for heavier blows. That unexpected afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox. There was no stamp or postmark, just my name written in neat block letters. When I opened it, a printed page slid out. "If you don't continue financial support, we will be forced to pursue legal measures to protect the family's interests." At the bottom were Kevin and Lauren's signatures, side by side. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hand. So it had come to this, a formal threat. No longer just tears or raised voices, but a document that promised consequences. I was no longer just facing my son's disappointment. I was facing a carefully crafted scheme. I stared at Kevin's signature. The handwriting I once praised in elementary school thank you notes now threatened me with legal measures. My chest tightened, but my resolve didn't waver. If anything, the letter confirmed what I already knew. To them, I was nothing but a financial resource. That evening, while rinsing dishes, I caught a glimpse into Kevin's thinking. Through my kitchen window, I saw him sitting in his truck parked across the street. He wasn't looking at my house, just staring straight ahead at nothing, his profile illuminated by a street light. For a moment, I saw uncertainty on his face, the face of a man confronting the collapse of a system he'd taken for granted. For the first time since this began, I wondered about the pressure Kevin might be under. Lauren had always been the more aggressive one about money, constantly upgrading their lifestyle, insisting on the best schools for Lily, talking about image and appearances. Kevin had been more hesitant in the early days, almost apologetic when asking for loans. When did that change? When did my son transform from the boy who blushed when borrowing $20 to a man who co-signed threats? I watched him sit there for nearly 10 minutes before Lauren called him on his cell phone. He answered, nodded a few times, and drove away without ever looking at my house. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with just a small lamp glowing, memories unspooling like an old film. Kevin's high school graduation, his wedding to Lauren, the day I handed them money for their first apartment, the nights I stayed up trying to juggle their growing debts. It all led to a painful conclusion. To them, I wasn't a mother. I was a mobile bank. And when the bank closed, they treated me like a traitor. But mixed with the pain was a small ray of clarity. The truth had surfaced. No more illusions, no more faint hope that my love would eventually be returned. That stark truth, harsh as it was, had set me free. The next day, I called George Thompson, the attorney who had helped with Robert's will years ago. I told him about the threatening letter. "Barbara," he said after a long silence, "this is serious. You need to gather every piece of evidence, bank statements, texts, letters. We need to prepare for the worst-case scenario." My heart pounded as I hung up. I was no longer in a vague defensive position. I had officially stepped into a battle. Early evening, while I was organizing paperwork at George's request, the doorbell rang. I glanced out the window to see Kevin and Lauren again, but this time with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, in a dark suit, holding a leather portfolio. I didn't answer the door. I stood behind the curtain, watching quietly. They knocked, called my name, then started shouting when I didn't respond. Lauren's voice rose above the others. "Barbara, if you don't come out, we'll record a video to show everyone how you're abandoning your family and grandchild." I stayed still, my heart aching, but I didn't move. After nearly 10 minutes of this performance, they left. The front lawn bore the imprints of their angry steps. I sank into my armchair and covered my face. The hurt flooded in, but within it, a strange pride rose up. I hadn't opened the door. I hadn't caved to intimidation. As I was trying to calm my racing heart, I noticed movement across the street. My neighbor, Margaret Wilson, was watching from her porch. When our eyes met, she gave a small nod, then walked across the street toward my house. I'd known Margaret for over 10 years, though we'd never been close, just the occasional hello at church or the grocery store. But today, something in her expression told me she understood exactly what was happening. I opened the door before she knocked. "Barbara," she said softly. I couldn't help overhearing. "Are you all right?" I hesitated, then gestured for her to come in. We sat on my living room couch, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor. Slowly, I told her everything. Being shut out of the housewarming, canceling the transfers, Kevin and Lauren showing up to yell, and now the threatening letter. Margaret listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Barbara, you're not alone," she said firmly. "I've been through something very similar. My son tried to have me declared incompetent so he could take this house. I know what it's like to be seen as a wallet by your own blood." My chest tightened. Someone understood my pain that intimately. Margaret told me that 5 years ago, her son and daughter-in-law had pressured her relentlessly after her husband died. They kept borrowing money for a restaurant business, then blamed her when it failed. When she finally refused more loans, they hired a lawyer and prepared a guardianship petition, claiming she was mentally declining. "They tried to take everything, Barbara. Everything I worked for my entire life," Margaret said, her eyes clear and direct. "They almost succeeded." "What happened?" I asked, leaning forward. "I fought back. I found a good attorney. I got an independent psychological evaluation. I had neighbors willing to testify about my competence, and I won." She squeezed my hand again. "Since then, I've learned how to set boundaries, even with my own child." Listening to her story, I felt both horrified and strengthened. This wasn't just happening to me. There was a pattern, a playbook that adult children sometimes used against parents who stopped being financially convenient. "How did you get through it?" I asked. "Didn't you feel guilty? Like you were failing as a mother?" Margaret looked straight at me, her gaze resolute. "Of course I did. I cried until I couldn't breathe, night after night. But then I realized something. Being a mother doesn't mean supporting your adult children for life. They grow up, start families, and must stand on their own feet. Love doesn't mean unlimited financing." Her words rang through me like a bell. I saw how far I'd gone down the road of sacrifice, so far that I'd forgotten there should be limits. We sat a while longer as the light faded. Before she left, Margaret offered, "If you need it, I'll testify for you. I've seen Kevin and Lauren raise their voices at you many times. The neighborhood knows it too. Don't be afraid. You have witnesses." Tears pricked my eyes as I squeezed her hand. "Margaret, you're my lifesaver. I never imagined I'd find an ally right across the street." She smiled kindly. "We're mothers, Barbara, and sometimes mothers have to remind each other that we deserve protection too." That evening, I went through my files again, but this time, those cold numbers weren't just evidence of my foolishness. I saw them as ammunition, and Margaret had just placed a shield in my hands. I began sorting everything methodically, dating documents, clipping in text messages, printing emails. As my hands moved with growing confidence, a certainty rose in me. I wasn't alone anymore. 2 days later, Kevin came again. I looked out the window and saw him with Lauren, and this time the man in the suit was definitely a lawyer. His stern posture and leather briefcase made that clear. I didn't open the door. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Margaret. She answered immediately. "They're here with a lawyer," I whispered. "I don't know what to do." "I'll be right over," she said firmly. "Stay calm, Barbara. Don't open the door until I arrive." When Margaret pulled into my driveway 5 minutes later, the trio outside looked thrown off balance. Kevin tried for a steady voice. "Mom, this is our legal advisor, Mr. Daniels. He just wants to talk and find a solution for everyone." I stood behind the locked door, watching through the peephole. Margaret walked directly up to them, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, her back straight despite her 70 years. "I'm Margaret Wilson, the neighbor," she announced in a clear, carrying voice. "I've witnessed enough disturbances here. If you continue harassing Barbara, I'll call the police immediately." The air shifted at once. Lauren yanked Kevin's arm, whispering urgently. The lawyer glanced around, clearly noting that other neighbors were now watching from their windows. "Let's go," Lauren said. "Standing here is pointless." As they retreated to their car, I exhaled shakily, my hands still trembling. Margaret turned to me with a small smile. "See? Sometimes just one witness is enough to stop them from crossing the line." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. In my dreams, I walked through a bright garden, surrounded by the laughter of older women. I knew it was the image of community strength that Margaret had opened up for me. The next morning, I baked a blackberry pie from scratch and took it to Margaret's house. She opened the door, surprised. "Barbara, you didn't have to bring anything." I smiled. "This isn't about courtesy. I just wanted to say that because of you, I found peace again in my own home." We sat together on her porch, eating pie and sipping tea, talking like old friends. I told her about the good memories buried under years of financial strain, about Robert, about my hopes for retirement before it all went sideways. Saying these things out loud felt like releasing birds that had been caged too long. Margaret nodded. "When my husband died, I went through something similar. My son saw my grief as weakness, an opportunity to take control. It's a pattern I've seen too often with widows." "Do you still talk to your son?" I asked hesitantly. "Occasionally," she sighed. "On his terms when he needs something, but the relationship has never been the same. That's the price I paid for my independence." I felt a stab of grief. Would that be my future with Kevin too? "It doesn't have to be that way for you," Margaret added, seeing my expression. "Some children eventually come around when they see their manipulation won't work anymore. The real question is, can you live with the possibility that Kevin might not?" I stared into my teacup, watching the amber liquid swirl. I think I'm starting to realize I can. The alternative, continuing to be used, isn't living at all. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Today I gained an ally. Margaret, a woman who understands a pain I thought only I carried." Maybe this journey isn't just about protecting my assets. Maybe it's about learning to stand with other women who've been where I am now. A few days after Margaret stood up for me, I got another letter. This time it wasn't Kevin's messy writing, but a clean printout with a law firm's letterhead. Hanson, Daniels, and Wright, attorneys at law. In formal language, they claimed I showed signs of mental instability requiring supervision to prevent financial risk. They also mentioned the legal rights of direct heirs and something about elder care evaluation. Plainly put, they were building a case to drag me into court and force me to hand over control of my finances. They wanted guardianship, the nuclear option. When I finished reading, a chill ran through me, but instead of panicking, I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. Then I called George Thompson. "George, I need you to look at this right away." An hour later, he was sitting at my kitchen table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied the letter. "They're using the classic playbook, Barbara," he said, frowning. "I've seen it many times. They want to paint you as a paranoid elder who can't manage her affairs. That way they can get court-appointed control over your finances." "Can they do that?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "They can try," George replied, removing his glasses. "But we need to get ahead of it. I want to arrange an independent assessment by doctors I know personally. It's like a second opinion, both to document your capacity and to shut down their tactic. When we're in court, these experts will be your wall of defense." I nodded, a sense of direction replacing my fear. "Let's do it." 2 days later, I met with the psychologist and internist George had arranged. Dr. Sarah Moore was a middle-aged woman with round glasses and a direct manner. The evaluation took place in a bright office filled with natural light from wide windows. She asked me a long series of questions, dates and figures, problem-solving scenarios, emotional situations. I answered each one clearly, sometimes with more detail than she expected. When she asked me to calculate monthly expenses, I immediately recalled exact figures, including the $47,600 I'd given Kevin and Lauren over 5 years. When we finished, she smiled warmly. "Mrs. Jones, honestly, your mind is sharper than many people half your age. I'll write a detailed report. No one can twist the truth of what I've observed here today." Hearing that, my eyes stung, not because I doubted myself, but because someone outside my situation finally saw the truth about me. A completely lucid woman who had simply endured exploitation for too long. As George and I left the clinic, he said quietly, "We've landed our first counterpunch, Barbara. But prepare yourself. Kevin and Lauren won't stop. They'll use harder psychological tactics to make you cave. Stay firm." I nodded, my heart heavy, but my resolve strengthened. Sure enough, that night my phone rang non-stop with calls and texts. This time the messages weren't angry. They dripped with carefully staged emotion. Lauren wrote, "Mom, do you remember when you held Lily for her first Christmas? She keeps asking for Grandma. She cried when she heard you're upset with us. Please don't turn your back on the family." I bit my lip, my heart aching. I knew Lily was only 4, too young to understand any of this. That message wasn't my granddaughter's voice. It was Lauren's calculated ploy. Then Kevin. "Mom, I just drove past your house. The lights were on, but you didn't answer the door. I know you saw me. I don't want us to become strangers. I regret so much." I sat by the window watching the streetlight wash the sidewalk in pale yellow. A part of me wanted to call him, to bridge the growing gap. But then I remembered the legal letter and Kevin's cold eyes when he said, "You'll regret this." I knew those remorseful lines were just another tactic. The next day, I showed the messages to Margaret during our morning coffee. "They're trying everything," she said, stirring her cup thoughtfully. "One minute it's threats, the next it's sweet talk. That's classic psychological warfare. Make you waver until you can't tell what's real. But remember, Barbara, the truth is what you've seen with your own eyes, not what they type in a text." I nodded, feeling steadier with her guidance. "Keep every text, email, and letter," Margaret added. "Every line will turn into evidence of their manipulation. Don't delete anything, even if it hurts to read." I did as she advised, printing all the messages and filing them with my growing collection of evidence. Each page felt like another puzzle piece exposing the truth of our relationship. That afternoon, while I was sorting papers, I got a call from an unknown number. The woman on the line said she was a social worker and that they'd received a report that I was showing signs of confusion and needed a safety check. My blood ran cold. Clearly, Kevin and Lauren had filed a report with social services. They were escalating their strategy, trying to build a case for their guardianship petition. I stayed calm and replied, "I'm sorry, but I won't answer any questions without my attorney present." The caller sounded surprised, mumbled something about standard procedure, then hung up. I called George immediately and told him what happened. "Good response, Barbara," he said approvingly. "This is their reverse psychology move, trying to turn your caution into proof you're paranoid. But we have the independent assessment plus witness support. Don't be afraid of their tactics." Hearing that, I felt like I'd just sidestepped a carefully laid trap. Later that evening, Lauren's perspective came into clearer focus when Margaret called me. "Barbara, I was at the grocery store and overheard Lauren talking to someone on her phone. She didn't see me, but I heard enough. She was saying they need access to Mom's accounts because they're underwater on the house payments. Then something about credit card debt that's through the roof." I sat down heavily. "So it is about money, pure and simple." "Yes, but there's more," Margaret continued. She sounded genuinely panicked, Barbara. Said something about how they can't keep up with the lifestyle, and Kevin doesn't know how bad it is. I think she's been hiding the extent of their financial troubles from your son." That night I sat on my porch as the cool evening breeze rustled through my hair. Margaret joined me, bringing over freshly baked cookies. We ate and talked, watching fireflies blink in the growing darkness. "Lauren might be driving this more than Kevin realizes," I said softly. "He always seemed uncomfortable asking for money, especially in the beginning. Maybe he doesn't know how deep they're in." Margaret nodded. "That's often how it works. One spouse pushes, the other follows, getting more comfortable with it over time. But Barbara, even if Kevin is being influenced, he's still responsible for his actions. He's a grown man, not a child." "I know," I sighed. "I just keep hoping there's a way back for us." "Focus on protecting yourself first," Margaret said gently. "Then maybe there can be healing, but not while they're actively trying to take control of your life." Before bed, I wrote in my journal, "They think they're cornering me, but their mind games are exactly what help me see their true nature more clearly. I'm not swayed anymore. I have evidence, allies, and faith in my own judgment." I closed the notebook and lay my head on the pillow. For the first time in weeks, sleep came easily. Not because the storm had passed, but because I'd learned how to stand steady in the midst of it. Just 1 week later, I received a thick envelope stamped by the local county court. My stomach dropped, and my hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a petition for guardianship against me. Right in the first line, my name, Barbara Jones, appeared in formal type, followed by allegations that chilled me to the bone. The document claimed that I had recently displayed erratic spending patterns, was isolating myself from family, showed signs of depression and paranoia, and that there was risk of outsiders exploiting her assets. I let out a dry laugh that sounded like metal scraping metal. The very people who had lived off me for years now dared to paint me as a victim of exploitation by unnamed outsiders. I called George immediately, my voice shaking. They filed for guardianship. "I'll be right over," he said without hesitation. An hour later, we sat at my kitchen table, George methodically reviewing the court papers. "This is a serious escalation," he said, "but we've been preparing. We'll prove this filing is not just misguided, but fraudulent." He opened his briefcase and pulled out the materials we'd gathered. Bank statements, receipts, the money demand texts, and Dr. Moore's assessment report. Stacked together, they looked like a fortress of evidence. "Their weakness is fabricated evidence," George explained. "I'll ask the court to verify the source of everything they've submitted. If we expose even one false claim, their whole case collapses." I nodded, feeling a new surge of determination. This time, I wasn't just defending, I was counterattacking. As predicted, when the court sent over their file for us to review, George spotted something odd. There was a medical certificate signed by a psychiatrist named Dr. James Anderson, claiming I had signs of memory decline and needed long-term monitoring. George checked the medical database and discovered that Dr. Anderson had retired 3 years ago. The signature on the paper was clearly forged. I stared at the document, numb with disbelief. They forged medical records? "Exactly," George said firmly. "And that's our strike point. Submitting forged documents to the court is a serious offense. Once we prove this, they won't just lose, they'll face legal consequences." In the days that followed, I devoted all my time to organizing evidence. Every evening, I spread files across my dining table and labeled folders by topic: bank records, text messages, forged medical documents, neighbor statements. Margaret often came over to help, patiently reading through each message and reminding me to stay focused. "Think of it like cleaning out an old attic," she said one evening. "The more dust you clear away, the lighter you'll feel when it's finally done." One afternoon, George called, his voice electric with news. "Barbara, I just spoke directly with Dr. Anderson. He's willing to testify in court that the signature is forged. This is pivotal. Their mask is about to fall." I gripped the phone tightly, my heart pounding. All that pent-up grief and anger finally had a chance to be exposed in the light of day. While we waited for the court date, Kevin and Lauren kept up their routine, swinging between emotional manipulation and veiled threats. One day I got a text. "Mom, if you drop this, we'll let everything go and be like before." Another day. "If you keep being stubborn, don't blame us when the whole family hears about your problems." I didn't respond to any of it. I simply put each message into a folder labeled Manipulation Tactics. One evening, a call came from an unknown number. A woman identified herself as a legal assistant working with Kevin and Lauren, asking to visit my home to further assess your living situation. I laughed quietly. "If you want to assess anything, talk to my attorney. I don't let anyone into my home unless I invite them." Then I hung up without a tremor. I knew the closer we got to court, the more desperate their tactics would become. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room looking at old photos. Kevin's high school graduation, Robert holding baby Kevin in the hospital, our family vacation to the Grand Canyon when Kevin was 12. Where had it all gone wrong? When had my son's love transformed into calculation? There must have been warning signs I'd missed, moments when I should have set boundaries instead of opening my checkbook. Margaret came over with chamomile tea and sat with me until midnight. "It's normal to question everything now," she said softly. "But don't blame yourself. You love generously. That's never wrong. The mistake was only in not recognizing when that generosity became exploitation." The first hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I wore a light gray suit with a blue blouse, my silver hair neatly styled, and just a touch of makeup. In the mirror, I saw an older woman who stood straight-backed and dignified. No longer prey, no longer trembling. George drove me to the courthouse, with Margaret following in her car to testify if needed. When I entered the courtroom, I saw Kevin and Lauren sitting across the aisle. Lauren wore a conservative black dress, her usually perfect makeup subdued. She avoided my eyes. Kevin glanced up briefly, then stared at his hands. I caught a glimpse of something in his expression. Was it shame? Their attorney, Mr. Daniels, looked confident as he arranged papers on the table. But when George walked in with Dr. Moore and, surprisingly, Dr. Anderson himself, that confidence visibly faltered. The hearing began with the plaintiff's side presenting their case. Mr. Daniels leaned heavily on phrases like mental instability, irregular spending, and asset protection. I sat quietly, listening to this stranger describe a version of me I didn't recognize. When they presented the medical certificate, George stood immediately. He asked the court to compare it with Dr. Anderson's official records. Dr. Anderson took the stand, thin and white-haired, but with sharp, clear eyes. Holding up the paper, he stated firmly, "This is not my signature. I have never met Mrs. Barbara Jones, nor have I written this report. I retired in 2020. Whoever used my name on this document committed forgery." The courtroom fell silent. Kevin went pale. Lauren bowed her head, her shoulders visibly shaking. George continued methodically, presenting Dr. Moore's independent assessment confirming my full competence. Bank statements showing the money flowing to Kevin and Lauren over years, and the threatening messages they'd sent. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow on their carefully constructed narrative. I sat there clutching my purse, tears rolling silently down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from vindication. At last, the truth stood in daylight. When the hearing paused, the judge announced that more time would be needed to reach a final decision, but the exposed forged document had clearly damaged the plaintiff's credibility. As I left the courtroom, I heard the whispers. Unbelievable. Her own son forged documents to take control of his mother's money. I drew a long breath and held my head high. For the first time in months, I stepped into the sunlight unafraid. Margaret squeezed my hand as we walked to the car. "See, Barbara? Masks fall eventually. They can stage all the performances they want, but the truth has its own voice." That night, back in my quiet house, I wrote in my notebook, "Today they revealed their greed and lies before the law. I don't need to prove my love anymore. I only need to prove the truth." I closed the notebook and looked up at the ceiling, feeling strangely calm. The fight wasn't over, but I knew I was on the right path. More importantly, I was no longer a woman blinded by guilt or manipulated by false affection. I am Barbara Jones, and I've looked the truth in the eye without blinking. The formal hearing was set for a gloomy Monday morning in early November. I woke very early, well before sunrise, and sat at my vanity mirror for a long time. My reflection showed a woman with silver hair neatly combed, dark circles under her eyes, but a steady gaze that hadn't been there months before. I chose the navy blue blazer Robert had given me for our 40th anniversary, paired with a simple cream blouse. I wanted to appear not as a confused, elderly victim, but as a woman who had lived fully, made her own decisions, and kept her dignity intact. Margaret drove me to the courthouse, her presence a steady comfort beside me. On the way, she squeezed my hand gently. "Barbara, today you're not only standing up for yourself," she said softly. "You're standing up for many mothers who've been squeezed dry by their own children. Remember that." I nodded, unexpected faith rising in me. "I never thought I'd be here, fighting my own son in court." "You're not fighting Kevin," Margaret corrected. "You're fighting exploitation. There's a difference." The courtroom was unexpectedly full. I noticed familiar faces from church and the neighborhood. Some nodded when our eyes met, silent supporters I hadn't even realized I had. Across the room, Kevin sat with Lauren, both in dark formal clothes, their faces rigid with tension. Lauren's eyes darted around the room, never landing on me. She whispered something to Kevin, who sat straight-backed, lips pressed tight, fingers laced together on the table before him. George sat beside me, calm and prepared, his briefcase open with neatly arranged files. On his other side sat Dr. Moore and Dr. Anderson, both ready to testify. When Judge Eleanor Williams entered, the room fell silent. A woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair, she had a reputation for being thorough and fair. The plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Daniels, presented first. His voice was smooth as he laid out their case. Your Honor, this is a difficult but necessary petition. Mrs. Barbara Jones has recently shown concerning behavior that puts her financial security at risk. She has made erratic decisions, cut off contact with family members who care deeply about her welfare, and appears to be under the influence of neighbors who may not have her best interests at heart. I listened calmly, though each word felt like a blade aimed at my heart. Mr. Daniels continued, painting a picture of a confused old woman being manipulated by outsiders, while her loving son and daughter-in-law only wanted to protect her. When he finished, George stood, his voice low and sure. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Barbara Jones, is not unstable or confused as claimed. We have official medical reports, witness testimony, and substantial evidence that the plaintiffs have not only exploited Mrs. Jones financially for years, but have now resorted to forged documents to gain control of her assets. He placed a thick, numbered stack of evidence on the table. Judge Williams nodded for him to proceed. George called Dr. Sarah Moore first. She took the stand with a confident step, her professional demeanor immediately commanding respect. I personally assessed Mrs. Jones 2 weeks ago, she testified. She is fully competent, with excellent memory and clear logical thinking. There are no signs of mental illness or cognitive decline whatsoever. In fact, her cognitive abilities tested above average for her age group. The judge studied Dr. Moore carefully, asking several detailed questions about the assessment methodology. Dr. Moore answered each one with precision, leaving no room for doubt. The room shifted subtly. I glanced at Kevin. He frowned and whispered something to Lauren, who stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Before they could recover, George called the key witness, Dr. Anderson. He walked to the stand slowly, leaning slightly on a cane. His weathered face was serious as he held up the forged medical certificate. This is categorically not my signature, he stated firmly. I never wrote a report about Mrs. Jones. I've never even met her. I retired from practice 3 years ago. Using my name and license this way constitutes forgery and potentially medical fraud. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. The judge's gavel brought silence. Kevin had gone visibly pale. Lauren's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. The truth they'd tried to bury was now standing under oath, speaking in a clear, unwavering voice. In cross-examination, George methodically presented 5 years of bank statements, line by line, showing transfers from me to Kevin and Lauren. He paused at the total, $47,600, not counting cash gifts or direct bill payments. If anyone needs protection here, he said slowly, looking directly at the judge, it is Mrs. Jones, a mother who has been systematically exploited by her son and daughter-in-law. A murmur of conversation spread through the courtroom. I caught someone muttering, "Shameful." Those whispers tapped like tiny drumbeats of agreement, and my heart pounded no longer from fear, but from validation. When Judge Williams asked if I wanted to speak, I stood. My legs trembled slightly, but my voice was clear and steady. Your Honor, I am Barbara Jones. I've lived 72 years through economic downturns, widowhood, and working to support a family. I never imagined I'd have to stand here to prove my competence. But today I'm not speaking only for myself. I'm speaking for all the mothers who've been exploited and cornered by their own children. I paused, feeling all eyes on me. I'm not confused or paranoid. I've just been silent for too long. When I finally said no to years of financial demands, I became the enemy. That's not mental instability. That's setting a boundary that should have been set long ago. In that moment, I felt compassionate eyes on me. George nodded. Margaret wiped away a tear. I knew I'd just articulated what so many women of my generation had kept inside for years. When the hearing adjourned, the judge announced that based on the evidence presented, particularly the forged medical document, the court would need to consider possible penalties against the plaintiffs. Meanwhile, the request for guardianship over me was denied. Furthermore, Judge Williams added, looking directly at Kevin and Lauren, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing the plaintiffs from contacting Mrs. Jones directly until this matter is fully resolved. Any communication must go through attorneys. The gavel struck like a bell of release. It was the first real slap of justice against what Kevin and Lauren had tried to do. They left in silence, their shoulders slumped, their earlier confidence gone. I watched them go, feeling both heartache and relief. I never thought I'd see the day my own son's deception would be exposed in court, but I also never thought I'd feel justice so close at hand. Outside, the autumn wind was cool and kind against my flushed face. George shook my hand with a warm smile. You did wonderfully, Barbara. We're not finished yet, but today we won a crucial round. Margaret hugged me tightly. You stood tall. I'm so proud of you. That evening, under the warm lamplight of my living room, I wrote in my notebook, Today I heard the voice of justice. It doesn't erase the loss of my relationship with Kevin, but it gives me faith that truth will prevail. And I know I'll keep going, however long the road. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams, wrapped in the peace of knowing I'd finally spoken my truth. 3 weeks later, on the day the court issued its final ruling, I sat in the courtroom with my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across the aisle, Kevin and Lauren sat close together, their faces drawn and tired. I could see new gray strands in my son's hair, the hollows under his eyes deeper than before. His gaze remained lowered, refusing to meet mine. Judge Williams read the decision in a steady, authoritative voice. After reviewing all evidence presented in this case, the court fully denies the petition for guardianship over Mrs. Barbara Jones. Furthermore, the court finds clear evidence of attempted fraud through the submission of falsified medical documents. She paused, looking directly at Kevin and Lauren. The court hereby orders Mr. Kevin Jones and Mrs. Lauren Jones to pay Mrs. Barbara Jones's legal fees in full. Additionally, they are prohibited from making any financial requests or solicitations to Mrs. Jones for a period of not less than 2 years. The gavel cracked against wood, splitting the silence. I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. Months of dread finally lifted from my shoulders. George gently placed his hand on my arm and whispered, Congratulations, Barbara. It's over. You won. But at the same moment, I heard a sharp, choked breath from Kevin. He hung his head, then suddenly stood and walked quickly toward the exit. Lauren called his name softly, but he didn't stop or turn back. I watched my son's retreating figure and felt my heart fracture anew. I had won in court, yes, but I knew I had just lost Kevin, not only legally, but perhaps forever. Outside the courtroom, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and offer kind words. Margaret hugged me tightly, and George smiled, saying I'd set a good example for others in similar situations. I thanked each person, but deep down the victory felt hollow. This legal triumph had come at the cost of a relationship I could never fully mend. That night my house felt unusually quiet and empty. I sat in the living room with only a small lamp glowing, casting soft shadows on the walls. On the coffee table sat a framed photo from years ago, Kevin at his college graduation, standing between me and Robert, his arm loosely around my shoulders, his smile bright and genuine. I touched the cold glass, tears slipping down my cheeks before I realized they had formed. A legal victory couldn't fill the empty space inside me where my son had once been. Memories flooded back unbidden. The day Kevin started kindergarten, how he'd clung to my hand at the classroom door. His high school football games, where I'd cheered from the bleachers every Friday night despite working double shifts that week. His wedding day, when I'd arranged every flower centerpiece myself to save them money. The day Lily was born, when I stood outside the delivery room, hands shaking as I held a small stuffed bear for my first grandchild. Those memories were my treasures, the reason I had worked hard and saved every penny, and now they felt like smoke slipping through my fingers. 3 days later, Lauren called. Her voice was cold and formal. "The lawyers said I could call to discuss Lily," she said without preamble. "I wanted you to know that you won. Congratulations. But from now on, don't expect to see Kevin. He doesn't want anything to do with you anymore." I kept my voice even, though my chest ached. "Lauren, please tell Kevin that I never stopped loving my son, but I couldn't let him turn me into an endless source of money. That's not love. That's exploitation." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Lauren said flatly, and hung up. I sat motionless for a long time after that call. The pain didn't crash over me in a wave. It seeped in slowly, like rain into dry soil. I understood now that to Kevin, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was the woman who had humiliated him in court. He couldn't see that his own actions had driven me to this extreme measure. In the days that followed, I lived more slowly and deliberately. I took walks in the neighborhood park. I joined a book club at the local library. I volunteered 2 mornings a week at the community center, teaching basic accounting to young people starting small businesses. Margaret stopped by often, sometimes with flowers from her garden or something she'd just baked. She understood my emptiness without needing many words. She simply sat with me, drank tea, and let the quiet be its own comfort. George called regularly to check in, reminding me not to dwell too much on what couldn't be changed. "Focus on building your life now, Barbara," he advised. "The past is written, but the future is still yours to create." One crisp morning in late November, while I was sweeping fallen leaves from my front porch, a small voice called out, "Grandma?" I looked up to see Lily standing at the end of my walkway, clutching a teddy bear, her wide eyes fixed on me. My heart leapt. Before I could respond, Lauren rushed up behind her, grabbing her hand firmly. "Lily, come on. We need to go." "But I want to see Grandma," Lily protested, trying to pull away. Lauren's face hardened. "Not today. Come on." She pulled Lily back toward their car parked across the street. My granddaughter looked back over her shoulder, confusion and disappointment clear on her small face. I stood there, broom in hand, watching that small figure disappear into the car. A tear slid down my cheek. I knew then that I had lost not only Kevin, but also any chance to be close to my granddaughter. That night I opened my notebook and wrote, "I won a battle but lost a piece of my heart. Justice offers protection, but it can't restore a mother's love once it's broken. Yet even in this pain, I know I made the right choice. I chose truth over manipulation, self-respect over exploitation." I closed the notebook and took a long, deep breath. Even in the hurt, a small flame glowed. Freedom's flame. I wasn't being pressured anymore. I wasn't living under constant demands or fear. And I knew this choice, however painful, had saved the remaining years of my life. The next day, I went to church. When Pastor Williams asked what I wanted to pray for, I simply said, "Please keep Kevin safe and help him find his way, even if that path no longer includes me as his mother." As soon as I said it, I felt lighter. I didn't expect Kevin to come back now, but I still wanted him to be safe and find a better way forward. Leaving church, I looked up at the autumn sky. Dark clouds hung gray and heavy, but far off, a narrow beam of sunlight broke through. I smiled despite my sadness, telling myself I still had years to live and more chances to give love, not to those who would use me, but to those who truly needed it. The legal victory had closed one chapter of my life. The loss of my son had opened a wound that might never fully heal. That was the truth I would have to learn to live with as I continued my journey forward. After the trial, I stayed mostly inside my small house for days. I needed time to breathe and let my heart settle after such heavy emotional blows. Then one morning, Margaret knocked on my door, holding the local newspaper. On page 3 was a lengthy article with a bold headline, "Elderly Mother Wins Case Against Son and Daughter-in-Law, a Wake-Up Call on Family Exploitation." I read every line, stunned and trembling. The article didn't just recap the trial. It spoke to a larger reality. Many seniors quietly drained by their own children and grandchildren. And somehow, I had become a prime example of standing up against this hidden epidemic. That week, calls started coming in. A reporter from the city paper wanted an interview. Several women from church asked to talk privately about similar situations they were facing. At first, I was reluctant and uncomfortable. I wasn't used to my private life being laid bare for public discussion. But then, a call came that changed everything. An older woman's voice shook over the phone as she told me her son had forced her to sign over her house, and she was now afraid to fight back for fear of being completely abandoned. I went silent, then burst into tears. "I understand," I told her. "I truly do, and you're not alone in this." That's when I realized I couldn't stay quiet. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to a community of women who needed to know they could stand up for themselves. Margaret encouraged me first. "Barbara, you have a strength you don't yet fully recognize. Use your story to help others. We could start a small support group." It sounded far-fetched initially, but something inside me responded to the idea. Maybe this was how I could transform pain into purpose. We started small, just a few meetings in the church's community room. I told my story, Margaret shared hers, and then other women began to open up. Some sobbed mid-sentence. Some trembled too much to speak clearly, but their eyes shone with relief at finding others who understood. We called our group something simple, Mothers Who Won't Be Silent. Word spread, and each week more people came. Some were older women with canes and walkers. Some were middle-aged, supporting elderly parents while being exploited by siblings. Even a few men joined, admitting their adult children had pushed them into financial hardship. I listened to each story, my heart aching and warming at the same time. I wasn't alone after all. A single wound had connected dozens, eventually hundreds of hearts. One day, after I finished speaking to the group, a woman named Patricia Davis stood, took my hand, and said with tears in her eyes, "Barbara, because of you, I refused to sign the transfer papers my son was pressuring me to sign. I'm not afraid of being called selfish anymore. I realize I have the right to live for myself." The room broke into applause, and I felt the bricks of my lonely wall begin to crumble. We didn't stop at sharing stories. George agreed to provide occasional legal guidance for especially difficult cases. He began coming to meetings, explaining how to keep records, how to recognize financial abuse, and how to seek help before it was too late. I remembered how he had urged me to get an independent evaluation. Without his guidance, I might have lost everything. Now his expertise was helping others find their way through similar storms. Bit by bit, our group became a real community. We organized small fundraisers and set up a modest fund to help mothers who had been cut off financially by their children. We wrote letters to local officials calling for more resources to address elder financial abuse in families. And I, who had once curled up in fear of confrontation, stood before a community center crowd and said clearly, "We are no longer silent victims. We have a right to speak our truth." Some nights after meetings, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, a strange peace filling me. I had lost Kevin and the chance to be close to Lily, but I had found a new family, one bound by truth, courage, and mutual support. I opened my notebook and wrote, "I'm no longer the mother who suffers in silence. I'm part of a community where we lift each other up and remind ourselves of our worth beyond what we give to our children." Through this unexpected community, I had found my voice again. I closed the notebook and smiled. At 72, life still had a new chapter to write, one not soaked in tears, but filled with purpose. That summer, for the first time in decades, I lived to my own rhythm. No more mornings waking to urgent financial requests. No more phone calls that felt like demands. I woke to quiet, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and stepped onto the porch, letting the breeze run through my silver hair. For the first time, each day truly felt like mine. I used my modest savings, what remained after years of supporting Kevin and Lauren, to refresh my home. I painted the scuffed walls a pale sage green. I planted roses and wild daisies in the front garden. I bought a comfortable porch swing to hang under the maple tree where I could read in the afternoons, listening to birdsong. It wasn't an extravagant life, but it was a world I had chosen for myself. I started traveling, something I'd put off for years while financing Kevin's life. My first trip was a week in New Orleans, listening to jazz in small cafes and wandering the old brick streets of the French Quarter. In a small restaurant near Jackson Square, a street musician played saxophone as the evening sun filtered through ancient windows. My throat tightened with emotion. Outside the whirlwind of family demands and constant financial pressure, there was music, the sweetness of sugar-dusted beignets, and friendly smiles from strangers who expected nothing from me. When I returned home, I took up painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned when Robert died. The small bedroom that had been piled with bills and financial worries became my studio. Southern landscapes, a portrait of Margaret. Even a self-portrait with a serene smile lined the walls like proof I had rediscovered myself. Friends from Mothers Who Won't Be Silent visited and admired my work, saying my paintings were full of life and light. I began teaching basic painting techniques to others in our group, watching women who had been diminished by their families stand taller as they created something beautiful. One evening, I visited Robert's grave. I sat beside his headstone in the quiet cemetery and whispered, "Robert, I did it. I'm no longer the woman who bowed her head, terrified of losing her son's approval. I stood up, I kept what we built, and more importantly, I kept myself." The wind moved through the oak trees overhead, and I felt like he was smiling. Occasionally, I heard about Kevin and Lauren through mutual acquaintances. They'd moved to a smaller apartment. Lauren worked full-time at a salon. Kevin had taken a job at an insurance company. Their financial situation had evidently stabilized, though on a more modest scale than before. I felt no hatred, only sadness. I had once hoped my son would eventually understand my position, but I had come to accept that might never happen. I had crossed that particular loss and learned to put a period at the end of that sentence. One Sunday morning after our support group meeting, Margaret said something that stuck with me. "Barbara, we're not just saving ourselves, we're planting seeds for the next generation. Their children will grow up in families that respect boundaries because mothers and grandmothers found the courage to speak today." I stood there deeply moved. I had never imagined my personal story could ripple outward like that, affecting lives beyond my own. As autumn returned, bringing the first anniversary of my court victory, I reflected on how much had changed. At 73, I had discovered new strengths I never knew I possessed. I had learned to say no. I had found joy in small pleasures, a morning cup of tea, a park concert, or simply watching flowers bloom in my garden. I understood that real love never comes from financial transactions, but from genuine respect and care. I had paid dearly for these lessons, but I had no regrets. From the rubble of a broken relationship, I had built a meaningful life for myself and helped others do the same. Then, on a crisp October morning, something unexpected happened. I was tending to my front garden when a car pulled up. Kevin stepped out alone. He looked different, thinner, his face more lined, his posture less confident. He stood at the edge of my property, hands in his pockets, uncertainty in every line of his body. "Mom?" he called softly. I straightened up slowly, my heart pounding. "Kevin." He took a few steps forward. "Could we talk? Just for a few minutes?" I nodded and gestured to the porch swing. We sat with careful space between us, the awkwardness of strangers who once knew each other intimately. "I've been in therapy," he said after a long silence. "For 6 months now." I waited, giving him space to continue. "Lauren and I separated 3 months ago," he added, looking at his hands. "It's been clarifying." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Kevin shook his head. "Don't be. It needed to happen. I've been living in a fog for years, Mom. Lauren always wanted more. Bigger house, better car, private schools for Lily. I got caught up in it, thinking that's what success looked like." He paused, struggling. "Then when you cut us off, everything collapsed. I blamed you completely, but my therapist helped me see how I'd been using you as a financial safety net my entire adult life." I felt tears gathering but held them back. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I owe you an apology," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "What we did to you was wrong. The court case, the forged documents, Lauren pushed for it, but I went along. I was desperate and angry and scared." He finally looked directly at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. And I'm sorry, Mom. More sorry than I can ever say." The words I had waited so long to hear hung in the autumn air between us. I didn't rush to embrace him or tell him everything was fine. That wouldn't be honest. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "It means a lot to hear." Kevin nodded, then stood to leave. "I'm not asking to come back into your life. I know I've broken something precious, but I wanted Lily to know her grandmother. If you'd be willing, maybe someday." "I would like that," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Very much." As he walked back to his car, he turned once more. "You look good, Mom. Happy." "I am," I replied. I found my way. After he drove away, I sat a long time on the porch swing, emotions washing through me in waves. This wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall between us. That night I wrote in my journal, "Today, Kevin came to apologize. Not to ask for money or help, but to acknowledge the truth. I don't know where this path leads, but for the first time we're both walking with open eyes. I closed the notebook and looked out at the stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue sky. Life had taken me on a journey I never expected. From silent sacrifice to painful awakening, from courtroom battles to community building, and now to this moment of tentative peace. I didn't know if Kevin and I would ever fully repair our relationship. I didn't know if I'd be part of Lily's life in any meaningful way. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had found my voice, and I would never lose it again. Now, as I write this, I'm 74 years old. The support group has grown to over 50 members. We've helped dozens of mothers regain their financial independence and self-respect. My paintings hang in a small local gallery. I've traveled to 3 more states I'd always wanted to visit. I see Kevin occasionally, careful, healing conversations over coffee. I've seen Lily twice for supervised visits. Small steps on a long road. I don't have many years left. But every year, month, and day means something new now. I know how to say no. I choose joy for myself, without guilt. I understand that real love never requires emptying your bank account or sacrificing your dignity. I paid dearly for these lessons, but I have no regrets. From the ruins of what I thought family meant, I built something authentic and meaningful, not just for myself, but for others walking the same difficult path. And to anyone listening who feels used, dismissed, or treated like a walking ATM by family members, remember this. You have the right to speak. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to live for yourself. It's never too late to begin again. I close my notebook and smile at my bright garden outside the window. For the first time in decades, the future isn't hazy or frightening. It's clear as a summer sunrise, and it belongs to me. If you've stayed with me to the very end of this story, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for hearing the voice of a woman who once seemed fragile, but found strength in her deepest pain. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you were in my place, what would you do? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your generosity? Please share in the comments. If this touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and come back for more stories. Your support and presence are the greatest encouragement for me to keep sharing these difficult but important truths. With gratitude, Barbara.